Speed of light, in the car we're driving through the night. The stars above us flying, you and I never felt so alive, you and I. Love in the heat of the night. Speed of light, almost fast as lightning. You look divine. Oh my God, you're shining, you and I never felt so alive, you and I. Love in the heat of the night. 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 Speed of light, in the car we're driving through the night. The stars above us flying, you and I never felt so alive, you and I. Love in the heat of the night. Speed of light, almost fast as lightning. You look divine. Oh my God, you're shining, you and I never felt so alive, you and I. Love in the heat of the night. 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 Speed of light, in the car we're driving through the night. The stars above us flying, you and I never felt so alive, you and I. Love in the heat of the night. Speed of light, almost fast as lightning. You look divine. Oh my God, you're shining, you and I never felt so alive, you and I. Love in the heat of the night. 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 Speed of light, in the car we're driving through the night. The stars above us flying, you and I never felt so alive, you and I. Love in the heat of the night. Speed of light, almost fast as lightning. You look divine. Oh my God, you're shining, you and I never felt so alive, you and I. Love in the heat of the night. All of the time we spent together in our prime, we were birds of a feather, different kind. We were laughing through the pain. You were never once so vain. Cut the cord that kept us connected, blacking out the mirror where your light once reflected. All of the love from up above, we used to feel like a glove. All of the time. All of the time. All of the time.
And live. What up, everybody? Welcome to the first installment of the Phoenix Files. We're going to do something different. I usually do music, as some of you know, but now we're going to do a read-through of a game we played, turned book, story, play, thing, invented by this man here, Omar Schrayter. So part of these, we played a game, and this is part of the story, and then he changed it into his rendition of the story. We're going to read through. It's fun. So we're going to read this. We're going to read other books. We're going to do all sorts of stuff on the Phoenix Files. Every Friday, join us. And without any further ado, let's get into this thing. Grab a drink, and welcome to the world of 2096.
All right, I am Omar. I'm the creator of 2096. Bunch of books and novels coming out, the same thing, based on that world that I made so long ago. And this story that we're going to read tonight, or start tonight, hopefully, and see how far we get. It's one of the first games that we've played in a long time, and it's loosely based on the events. It follows it to a degree, and then it kind of diverges. But it's a good time. The book is right now available on Kindle Vella. And if you like what you read here, or listen to, I guess, or listen to us read, whatever, you can go and read it yourself at your own leisurely pace, because this is real life. Things start late. There's children and things that might happen around here, so we might have to take a couple breaks.
Lots of Christmas chaos.
In addition to Jason, who's my brother-in-law, my sister Geeta, who is also an author, is here. She's going to be narrator and doing some of the female voices. We're going to play, Jason's going to play his character he played and a couple other ones. And I don't know, we're just going to read it and enjoy ourselves. And let's just get right into it, I guess.
Okay, go. Cheers.
Anon, Flag, and Rogbert were travelers stuck in the sandpit, an outpost located deep in the desert, known for its prized worm and worm hunters. However, the three of them were not hunters. That is, until chance gave them the opportunity they needed so badly to prove themselves. Things quickly spiraled out of control as they realized they are well in over their heads. Welcome to the world of 2096, a world where everyday life is a constant struggle, and death waits around every corner. Flag! Pay attention!
Blake yelled. Flag snapped out of it and looked down. The thick cut of desert worm was definitely burnt. He scraped the steak off the grill top and looked over at Blake, a larger man wearing a dirty apron and sweating just as much as he was. He puffed on a lit cigar and shook his head. Flag shrugged as he tossed the well-done piece of meat onto a metal plate and grabbed a worn plastic squeeze bottle. He squirted a thick, dark sauce over the top. Desert worm tasted like a block of uncooked tofu with a somewhat bitter aftertaste. It wasn't unpleasant once one got used to it, but the sauce helped, especially when desert worm was one of the only things to eat. The other being desert beetles and their eggs, of which they had plenty since they were a local crop. Flag grabbed 2 beetle eggs from a nearby container, yellow in color and slightly translucent. Each one was about 5 centimeters in size and felt gelatinous in his hands. He tossed them on the grill and then made a squeaky sound as they started to cook. He watched as the larvae inside squirmed from the heat. There was a popping sound as he pushed down on them and smeared the larvae on the grill. He cooked them for only a few moments, so they were still somewhat runny, and placed them on the plate beside the charred meat. He turned around and set the plate down on the counter in front of a thin, dirty-looking man. The man looked down at the food and licked his lips. Flag guessed the man probably hadn't eaten in a few days. The man picked up a blade and cut into the desert worm, throwing the piece in his mouth and chomping down. Flag didn't say anything and turned back towards the grill. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw 2 people enter the sparsely packed diner. They came over to the counter and sat next to the dirty man.
Can we go 2 of those?
One of the men asked. Flag looked over, recognizing the man's voice. It was indeed someone he knew. 2 people he knew, actually. Anon and Rogbert. Anon and Rogbert were in the same situation as Flag, having made it as far as the sand pit but unable to afford passage out. Stuck, they also took whatever job the pit bosses offered. Both of them worked in the hub, which was the worm processing facility next to the garage. Flag didn't know if it was better or worse than what he was doing, as worm processing was a messy ordeal and smelled quite bad, as Anon was currently involved. Flag wrinkled his nose.
Did you crawl into the fucking worm?
Huh?
Anon replied, totally oblivious to his current lack of personal hygiene. Even the dirty man had glanced over at him.
You're disgusting.
Oh, well, we took the last large piece of worm off the flatbed. You know, we pressed most of it into worm water and we hung the pressed pieces to dry. And only a little was sent to distillation.
Oh, great.
Flag said as he tossed 2 thick worm steaks on the grill.
So we're gonna run out of worm shine.
Nah, they have tons of the stuff. Sand barges haven't come in lately, as if you didn't know.
Rodbert said with a smile.
I may spend all day in here cooking, but I'm not clueless.
Flag said as he held up a couple of beetle eggs. Rodbert nodded in reply while Anon just stared. Flag turned back to the grill and tossed the eggs.
Head to the strip after?
Sure. I need to get drunk after working here all these hours.
That should make you work 18 hours like some of the others. Consider yourself lucky you work here.
Flag didn't say anything.
You're done right soon.
Flag looked outside and realized the sun was setting. The diner would start to get busy as people woke and came out for the evening. The 3 of them worked the day shift, the quietest time and also the worst time to work, as it was too hot during the day to do much of anything. Being in the sun for a prolonged period spelled certain death.
Oh, I didn't realize what time it was. I'm having so much fun.
He said, looking at Blake, who took a puff on his cigar, some of its ash falling into whatever he was concocting.
Sure, Flag. Fun. That's exactly what this is. Finish up with those 2 and you can get out of here.
Flag finished cooking and gave them their meals. He tidied up a bit and sat down next to them while they ate.
Not hungry?
Flag just shook his head. Being around food all day made him anything but. Flag noticed Anon staring at the door. One of the diner's servers, Alicia, walked in for her shift. She was wearing a lightweight dress that hugged her curvy body. Flag was surprised that Pit Boss didn't keep her for himself, as he had a harem of women he kept in his residence, a former bank. The bank was quite secure, guarded by his vest. They not only protected the Pit Boss, but the bank's vault as well, keeping a close eye on the Pit Boss's personal stash and all the pit's ammunitions. There were other females and some males that he had worked in the barracks as companions, obviously not by choice. The barracks, as they called it, was a former motel. It cost more to live there than in the trailers that Flag, Anon, and Rodbert shared with others. The barracks were where most of the desert work hunters and more important Sandpit residents lived. Alicia grabbed an apron off the wall and slid it over her head, walking behind the counter. Blake, she said with a smile. He looked her up and down and took a puff on his cigar, turning back to what he was doing. How was it? She asked, walking up to the 3 of them. She wrapped the apron straps around her waist and tied them in the front. The apron was just as worn and dirty as everything else in the diner.
I didn't.
Work, Flag. How was work? Flag shrugged in response. She smiled and turned around, throwing a worm steak on the grill.
Smoke.
Rodbert said, elbowing Flag in the stomach.
Whatever, shut up.
Rodbert had a big smile on his face, and Anon was staring at Alicia with his mouth wide open. He was definitely drooling, and it wasn't from the food.
Anon,
Flag yelled, causing Anon to jump.
you both finished? I think we should go.
Flag asked, standing up. Anon stuffed the last of the food in his mouth and pushed his plate away.
Alicia, Blake, I'll see ya.
Flag grabbed his gear from behind the counter.
Make sure you fuckers pay.
Blake yelled.
Yeah.
Rodbert replied. Flag adjusted his pistol and walked out the diner. Rodbert swiped his vault card across the pay station and looked over at Anon, who was still staring at Alicia.
You pay for yourself.
He said, grabbing his own pack from the floor and following Flag. Anon stood and yelped as he banged his knee against the underside of the counter. The few people that were in the diner looked over at him as his face turned red. He paid and limped back to the other 2. The sun had disappeared over the horizon, and the sandpit was now gently lit by dim yellow lights. Across the street was a motel, and next to that the strip where they were headed. The strip drew one's attention, as it was more lit up than the rest of the sandpit. Above the den and the bar were bright hollow signs advertising what each place offered. Although the den and the bar were similar, they had their differences. The bar was more focused on drinking, while the den was focused more towards stims and sex. Although you could really get anything you wanted at either location, There were no police and no laws that prohibited substances. People were free to express themselves. There was also plenty of nudity in both locations, and sex acts were common in the lounge areas. Aside from a few groups of people, the street was mostly deserted. There was no vehicle traffic, as most of the Sandpit's vehicles were cannibalized for parts. Anything that still worked was housed in a garage. Anon caught up to them midway across the street.
Where were you?
I bumped my leg. I'm fine though, thanks guys.
He said, tightening the straps on his backpack, which always seemed packed to the brim. Flag never really asked what he was carrying and didn't really care. It just always seemed like he kept it packed. The three of them were each only lightly armored and armed, each one similarly carrying a pistol and a blade. Rodbert had a sniper rifle strapped to his pack, but Flag had never seen him use it. He didn't know if he was any good with it. They were heading towards the bar's entrance when they overheard a voice.
Excuse me.
They looked over to see two men walking towards them. Both were quite thin and wore torn, ragged clothing. They were covered in dirt and sweat. Vagrants. People who got stuck like they did, but didn't work.
What do you want?
Rodbert asked.
I don't want to bother you.
The man said with a toothless smile, stepping closer. His skin was leathery, and dirt was caked between the creases of his weathered face. Even though Flag hadn't showered in a while, he was hit by an overwhelming musty smell even worse than Anon.
Just wondering if you could help a fellow out. We haven't eaten in a while, and really anything will help.
Sorry, old man. I need my credits for shine.
Rodbert said. Flag suddenly saw some movement from behind them. He glanced over and saw 3 more vagrants creeping up on them.
I think you guys should get out of here.
Flag said, slowly moving his hand to his pistol.
We wouldn't want any trouble now, would we?
The toothless man put his hands up and smiled awkwardly.
No trouble.
He said, taking a step back. Flag saw the glint from a blade as one of the vagrants lunged from behind. Flag quickly pulled his pistol and turned just as he heard a click. The man stopped in his tracks and looked wide-eyed. Flag saw something hit the ground by Anon's feet. Anon was standing there with a big smile on his face and holding something in his hand. It wasn't Flag's pistol that had stopped the man. It was what Anon was holding. What fell to the ground was a pin. The pin to a grenade.
Anon, don't.
Flag yelled. Anon's smile widened.
Just this man. Listen, we're
Looking for something to eat. We're sorry. Please.
The toothless man shouted, taking another step back.
I think you best get out of here now.
I think he's right. If you know what's good for you.
Flag added, keeping his pistol pointed at the vagrant's head.
We're sorry, okay?
The toothless man took another step back.
Get out of here.
Flag yelled. The men turned and ran off, not bothering to look back. Flag holstered his pistol and looked over at Anon.
Nice thinking.
Yeah, dropping the pin made it really believable. I seriously thought you were going to use it.
Rodbert said, picking up the grenade's pin. He held it out to Anon, who just stood there and looked at it for a moment, a contemplative look on his face. Flag and Rodbert looked at each other, somewhat worried.
Anon, you were just bluffing, right?
Flag asked.
Yeah, I mean, if you did drop that, we would all be dead.
Rodbert said, still waiting for him to take the pin. Anon hesitantly smiled, took it, and reinserted it back into the grenade.
Yeah, of course I was just bluffing.
He said with an unconvincing chuckle.
Where did you even get that?
Oh, I found it.
He replied, stuffing the grenade into a utility pouch on his belt.
Man, I could really use a drink.
He said with a smile and walked past them into the bar. Rodbert and Flag looked at each other uncomfortably.
He was just bluffing, right? So, what else do you think he's carrying?
I don't know. I don't think I want to know. We'll just have to watch him.
Rodbert walked into the bar, shaking his head. Flag stood there for a moment and looked around, wondering how much damage that grenade would have done, wondering if Anon was serious. He wasn't sure, and that worried him. He shook it off and followed behind Rodbert. The bar was dark and grimy, lit mostly by hollow lights that floated above the bar top and tables, of which there were 6, all high tops pushed against the right wall. Towards the back, there was a lounge area with a few worn and very used couches. The area was surrounded by hollows that concealed the area slightly. They were really walls of light that you could see through. Luminous smoke filled the room from hookahs in the lounge area and stims the other occupants were enjoying. The place was decently packed. Most of the individuals had probably been there all day, trying to escape the harsh desert sun and stay cool. Not that it was much better than inside, as the air in there was quite thick, ripe with the smell of body odor, alcohol, and stims. There were a few ceiling fans lazily rotating, but they didn't appear to be doing much of anything, so good the air. Most of the people were dressed in very desert clothing that was disheveled and dirty. There were a couple of the boss's guards that were wearing light armor and had rifles slung across their backs. They were quite close to each other and looked to be having a very serious conversation. There were at least 3 empty bottles of shine on the table in front of them. Resting against one of the side tables were a few of the pit's mechanics, one of them completely shirtless with augmented metal arms, a neon green tribal tattoo gently pulsing across both. It made it look like his arms were splitting open. His pants hung low on his waist, weighed down from a heavy-looking utility pouch on his belt. One of the other mechanics looked over at Flag with piercing ruby eyes. There were also a few people in the lounge section. Flag could just make out a female riding someone with spiky purple hair. Her back was completely bare. A white, luminescent tattoo of a winged dragon scrolled across her glistening back. As she moved up and down, its wings moved back and forth, as if it was actually trying to fly. The man tilted his head back and exhaled a cloud of blue, luminous smoke above him, making it appear as if a dragon was breathing fire. Flag headed over to the bar. Anon had already ordered and finished a shot or two.
Where's ours? Right here.
Anon replied, gesturing to the bottles of shine behind the bar.
I work hard for my credits. You can afford your own shine. I'll remember that.
Rodbert said, holding his hand up to get the bartender's attention. One of the two came over.
2 shines, one for me and one for my friend.
He said, pointing a thumb at Flag. Anon scowled and shot back his shine.
Thanks.
Flag said as he placed a foot on the bar's rest and leaned over, casually laying an elbow on the bar top.
Anytime, friend.
Rodbert replied as the bartender poured 2 shots. He placed the bottle in front of them and turned his attention elsewhere. Flag looked over towards the lounge and watched as the woman got off her mount. She walked out, stepping through one of the hollows, the light refracting momentarily around her. She was wearing a sheer, backless halter dress that shimmered slightly as she moved. She walked over to the end of the bar and set her empty glass down. Rodbert looked over at what caught Flag's attention.
Oh, that's nice.
He said, noticing Anon, who was staring as he usually does. The woman looked around the bar and noticed the 3 of them gawking. She didn't look away and just smiled. Anon's face reddened and he looked down at his shot glass. Flag and Rodbert both returned her smile.
Who's she?
Rodbert asked.
No idea. Never seen her before.
Now that's one you think the pit boss would keep for himself.
Something tells me she decides who she belongs to or who belongs to her.
A moment later, the bartender walked over to her and handed her a fresh drink. She turned and headed back into the lounge as the 3 of them continued to watch. Rodbert noticed a very large man looking at them from the lounge. He specifically noticed his eyes, which quickly flashed green. The man was also wearing a heavy armored trench coat and just standing there.
Shame she's hanging out over there.
Anon said, sipping his shine.
Like you would do anything with that.
I could do plenty with that.
Anon said, still looking over at the lounge area. Flag and Rodbert both broke out laughing.
I wouldn't even know where to put it.
Flag said,
Tell me, what would you do with her? Rodbert asked. Well,
Exactly. You're better off getting yourself one from the barracks, like a love doll, maybe.
fuck both of you.
Anon said.
No, don't go pulling that grenade of yours out.
Rodbert teased as Anon's face turned even redder.
Yeah, that'd be bad for all of us.
Flag said, laughing.
Boom!
Rodbert slapped Anon on the back, who tensed up and quickly turned away from them, shifting awkwardly on his seat. Flag and Rodbert quickly stopped laughing and looked at each other with a similarly concerned look on their faces. Both of them were unsure if Anon was going to pull a grenade out of his pouch. Flag cleared his throat and picked up the bottle of shine, pouring all 3 of them another.
Here you go, Anon. We're just kidding. No hard feelings.
Anon looked at the shot glass for a moment before he picked it up and shot it back. Flag could tell Rodbert was going to say something when sirens suddenly blared out across the sand pit, signaling the return of one of the hunting parties. The mechanics and a few of the others grumbled and started to make their way out of the bar.
We have to go too.
Rodbert said, finishing his drink.
You coming with us or you staying here?
Flag glanced over towards the lounge area and sighed.
I'll come.
He said, finishing his own drink. They swiped their vault cards across the pay pad and departed. Anon grabbed the almost finished bottle of shine and took it with him. The garage was back across the street and was only a minute from where they were. The sand pit had come alive as people headed to their stations. The main doors were on the other side of the building from where they were, facing into the desert. In the distance, there was a plume of dust that was growing larger. The vehicles had their bright off-road lights on. Rodbert partially covered his eyes, trying to get a better look at the approaching party.
Hey, Anon, how many vehicles left the other day? 4?
He replied.
Okay, so where are the other 2?
There were only 2 vehicles approaching the pit. One was a heavy 6-wheeled armored personnel carrier they simply called the Six. The other, a heavy truck that was hauling a large metal shipping container behind it. It split off and headed towards the hub, while the Six slowed and rolled up to the vehicle garage. It neared the outer lights, and they could now see it clearly. They looked at it in shock as it approached. The Six was completely covered in worm guts and looked like it took extensive damage.
Did it roll?
Anon blurted out. No one answered, as no one knew. Others had gathered and were also watching quietly as it approached. Loom was in its upper turret, scowling. He was an experienced worm hunter and the leader of the hunting team. The fact they were coming back 2 vehicles short was more than troubling. He doesn't look
happy.
Anon said, taking a step back so the Six wouldn't hit him. He looked over as the heavy truck pulled into the nearby hub.
Better get over there.
Anon said, and headed off towards it. As Anon got over to the hub, the large bay doors were being closed.
Hey, wait!
He yelled, upping his pace to a run. 2 of the pit boss's guards stepped in front of him and blocked his path.
This hub's currently off limits.
What do you mean off limits? I work here.
Not tonight, you don't. Come back in the morning.
The other guard said, making sure Anon saw the rifle he was holding. Anon looked over their shoulders and saw the heavy truck parked on the far side of the expansive bay. Anon and the guards jumped, startled by a loud thud that sounded like it had come from inside the container. It was followed by a drawn-out moaning sound that Anon could feel through his whole body. The sound echoed out across the sands just as the exterior doors closed with a thud. The guards looked at each other, then at Anon.
Like we said, off limits.
Just then, the ground beneath their feet started to tremble, stopping a few seconds later. Anon looked back at the guards, who looked wide-eyed. Both seemed very uneasy. Anon decided it was in his best interest not to pursue the matter, and turned to leave.
I think I'll get going now.
Good idea.
The guard replied. Rodbert and Flag had walked over to the back of the Six with the others, standing clear as its rear door opened and slammed onto the ground with a resounding thud.
We have injured!
Boom barked as he briskly walked out of the vehicle. He himself looked as though he had taken somewhat of a beating. He was covered in dried worm guts that had a greenish tinge. The other worm hunters and the wounded and the few that had returned were being helped out of the Six. A few of the more specialized personnel ran over to assist, pushing past Rodbert and Flag. They looked over to see 2 of the pit boss's guards walk in and meet Loom. Loom just looked at them as he passed and walked out of the garage. The 2 escorts quickly followed. Flag and Rodbert both jumped as a loud moan echoed across the desert.
What the fuck was that?
Rodbert asked. Flag looked at him wide-eyed, unsure exactly. Before he could answer, the whole garage started to shake. Items clambered to the ground as overhead lights rocked back and forth and the building creaked. Flag steadied against the Six and looked towards the door. There was a momentary hush that fell over the garage as everyone looked around, concerned. However, the shaking quickly subsided and they quickly resumed what they were doing.
A tremor?
Flag finally replied. One of the wounded worm hunters was being escorted by one of the pit's guards.
What happened?
Flag asked.
Got her asses handed to us, that's what.
Yeah, by a big fucking worm, another hunter replied.
Wait, what?
Rodbert asked.
Move.
One of the guards said as he pushed Flag out of the way and carried the wounded hunters out of the garage. Anon ran over, nearly bumping into the same group. He quickly moved out of the way and skirted by them.
A worm?
Flag asked.
Well,
Anon chirped.
don't you have work to do?
Rodbert asked Anon as he ran up.
No, they wouldn't let me in.
Wait, why?
Flag asked, confused.
I don't know. The heavy pulled in and parked towards the back of the hub. There was a loud thud and noise, and the ground shook. Yeah, we heard and felt that.
Rodbert said as they were approached by one of the mechanics. He was holding a couple buckets, brushes, and wet rags in them.
Glad the 3 of you are here. Makes yourselves useful.
He said, holding them up for the group. They looked over at the 6 and reluctantly took the cleaning supplies.
Looks like 2 Looks like you two got it, since there's only 2 buckets.
Anon said, walking away. Anon, the mechanic yelled, causing him to jump. He was carrying a canister of biofoam. Flag and Rodbert smiled as the mechanic handed it to Anon. They were still scraping and cleaning when Flag's comm turn went off an hour later. He took it out of his utility pocket and looked at it. It was Sierra, the boss's third in command. Anon looked over curiously as Flag picked up, the comm projecting her face above it holographically.
Yeah.
Are you with Anon and Rodbert?
Yeah.
He replied, looking at the 2 of them. Good. The boss wants to see the 3 of you, she said, hanging up. Flag and Rodbert both looked over at Anon.
Anon, what did you do now?
Anon's only response was a shrug as he threw his brush in a bucket and wiped some of the worm guts off his hands. Flag sighed, shook his head, and put his comm away.
Sorry!
Anon yelled at the mechanic.
The boss wants to see us.
The mechanic grumbled something as the 3 of them cleaned up and grabbed their gear. They left the garage and headed across the street to the boss's residence. The front of the bank was well lit, easily revealing a turreted armored vehicle with 3 of the boss's guards around it. There was one in the turret, leisurely reclined with his legs on either side of the large caliber munition. He puffed on a glowing stem and watched as they approached. Even though the sun was down, he was wearing sunglasses. The other 2 were leaning on the vehicle's hood, uninterested in their approach. There were 2 more guards leaning in the doorway, blocking the entrance. They didn't move as 3 of them walked up the front steps. One of the guards was chewing tobacco or a stem and spit some on the ground as they approached the top. He didn't move and continued to stand there.
You gonna let us in? Boss wants to see us.
Flag said, watching him continue to chew for a few moments. He finally looked over at the other guard and took a step aside, giving them just enough room to enter.
Gee, thanks.
The bank's lobby was fairly large, with a high ceiling, covered by a holo display that slowly changed. The air filled with luminous, shimmering smoke. Whatever the bank's lobby used to look like was very different from what it was now. Now more a bar for the boss's men and personal guests. The teller stations were converted to be a bar offering a much better variety than what they were used to in the strip. Around the tables were the boss's men, gambling and just lounging about. Trap and electro beats filled the space with deep bass. There were servers wearing close to nothing that walked around and took care of everyone's wants and needs. There was a large sweeping stairway on the right side of the room that led to a balcony in the boss's personal residence. Standing on the balcony was the boss with Sierra, his third in command. He turned around and entered his residence as the 3 of them ascended the stairs. The view was even better from the balcony, and the hollow ceiling was even more impressive. Anon almost tripped, distracted by the smoke and shimmering effect the hollow ceiling had. He managed to catch himself from falling, and the 3 of them walked to the door and entered the boss's residence. It was also darkly lit, and had no apparent windows. Here, the ceiling was about 4 meters in height. Luminescent drapes hung from the ceiling, covering the more private areas. The boss walked over and sat down on a plush-looking couch directly in the center. On one side were 2 girls lounging about wearing next to nothing. 2 guards stood nearby, and Loom and Sierra were also present.
You want to see us?
Flag asked, taking a step inside.
I did.
He said, looking over at Loom.
Yeah, it's your lucky day.
Loom replied with a sigh as he stabbed the glowing stem into his arm.
The 3 of you are coming on a recovery mission. Wait, what?
Rodbert asked, looking at the others in disbelief.
Loom will be heading the mission. We lost 2 vehicles and the hunters that went along with them. Other hunters are wounded. Time is of the essence here, and quite frankly, we don't have a lot of options. We need to try and get the vehicles back, and any survivors.
The boss said, looking over at Loom.
There aren't! I wouldn't have left any of my hunters behind.
The boss jumped up and lunged towards Loom with a tightly clenched fist.
Shut up, Loom!
Loom flinched and held his arm up, expecting to be hit, but the boss stopped himself centimeters away.
You're going back. You're taking them with you. We're short now because of your fuck-up. Do you understand?
He turned and punched one of the guards in the face. The guard fell back and landed on the 2 girls.
Now get the fuck out of here and bring back my vehicles!
Loom complied and headed towards the door. He stopped when he realized Anon, Flag, and Rodbert hadn't moved.
Let's go.
He yelled, storming out. The 3 of them quickly followed. Only when they got to the garage did Flag and Rodbert both notice Anon wasn't with them. They looked around, but didn't see him anywhere. They looked at each other, wondering where he had gone, but didn't say anything, and continued into the garage.
How's the looking?
Loom asked. The Six was still in rough shape and still covered in worm guts.
It's rearmed and ready when you are. It'd be a little cleaner, but I lost my cleaning crew.
The mechanic said, scowling at Flag and Rodbert, who just awkwardly smiled back.
There are a couple of vagrants who would probably help you if you asked.
Rodbert said, looking around for Anon.
Funny.
The mechanic grumbled and walked off. Loom just looked at the two of them for a moment before he shook his head, pulled out another stim, and injected it. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath.
Oh, there. That's better.
He said, opening them again. It was then he noticed Anon's disappearance.
Where the fuck's Anon?
Rodbert shrugged as Loom's face turned red. He looked like he was about to blow a gasket when Anon walked into the garage carrying a duffel bag.
Hey guys, sorry, I had to get my stuff.
Loom eyed Anon for a moment before he turned to the nearby mechanic.
Everyone else geared up and ready to go?
The mechanic nodded.
Yeah, they're on board.
He replied as there was another sudden tremor that shook the entire building. Like the last one, it quickly subsided. Loom looked around and thought for a moment before walking up the Six's ramp.
Let's go.
He shouted. The three of them quickly proceeded up the vehicle's ramp behind him. The Six was an expedition vehicle designed for prolonged travel through the desert. Known as a sand brawler by most, but to them it was called the Six because of its 6 large wheels. It had 3 main sections: the rear section with a row of 4 seats on either side and cargo space with tie-down points in the middle, the front section where the driver and mechanic typically sat, and the middle section, which had 6 bunks, 3 on each side. Like the rear, there was also cargo space in between the 2 sections. Only 3 of the bunks were usable, as 3 were filled with additional supplies and equipment. Its interior was dimly lit with strip lighting going down the length from the floor and ceiling. The Six was mostly metal and was aged but not in rough shape. There was no significant amount of moisture to rust or degrade the strength of the vehicle. Flag and Rodbert stowed their backpacks overhead and took a seat in the rear section. They watched as Anon stuffed his duffel underneath his seat with a big smile, a smile that somewhat unnerved them both, maybe even more so than the moans and tremors.
What's that?
Rodbert gestured to the duffel bag.
Yeah, I don't remember you having a duffel bag of stuff.
Well, there's a lot about me you guys don't know.
Anon replied with a grin. The others took their seats as the rear of the Six closed and its engines came to life. It rolled out into the desert and headed away from the sand pit. Anon smiled and pulled out a bottle of shine.
Want a sip?
He asked. Rodbert went to take the bottle, but Anon quickly pulled it away and smiled.
Sorry, this is mine.
He said, going to take a sip. Rodbert was about to lose it when Loom grabbed the bottle from Anon. Anon didn't say anything as Loom took a swig and walked towards the front of the Six with his new bottle of shine. Flag and Rodbert both held back their laughter as Anon's face turned red. As they continued into the desert, Anon finally pulled off. Better make yourselves comfortable. We got a long ride ahead of us, Taylor said. Taylor was on the original hunting party with Loom. She looked a bit banged up from her seat, but not as bad as everyone else did. In addition to Loom and Taylor, there were 5 more. Nellis and Dee were drivers and mechanics, both of whom were up front talking to Loom. Sitting next to Taylor was Method, Lexi, and Grom. Method was fairly seasoned and had been in quite a few expeditions. Lexi and Grom were new, as in their first trip out of the sandpit, just like the others. Both of them looked somewhat uneasy. Loom came back from the front and sat next to Anon, looking at him as he took another swig. Anon shifted uncomfortably, but knew better than to say anything.
I would listen to her. It's going to be quite a while. We're heading deep into the Badlands. About a day or so.
Loom said, putting his feet up on the cargo in front of them, still clenching his new bottle of shine. Flag looked over at Rodbert, who pulled some dried worm out of his pocket. At least we have air conditioning, Taylor said, looking over at Flag. He wouldn't complain about that. It was going to get hot outside. It was an uneventful trip, with only some whining from Anon. At one point, Anon fell asleep and Rodbert tried to get into his duffel bag. He unfortunately couldn't, as there was a coded maglock on it. Anon woke and made his usual threats about blowing everyone up, which only ended up pissing Loom off. As a result, Anon ended up losing the protein block. It had been over a day of traveling when Niles said they were approaching the location where the other vehicles were lost. Loom looked over at Method, who nodded and climbed up into the vehicle's turret. It was early morning and the sun was not yet up over the horizon, but there was enough light to see. Method scanned the area with his binoculars.
What do you have?
Loom asked, leaning forward into the cockpit.
Nothing. Looks quiet. We're not getting any worm activity.
How far are we?
Couple of kilometers.
All right, let me know when you have the vehicles.
Will do, Dee replied. Loom turned around and headed back into the rear.
Okay, kids, we're about to get this field trip rolling. We only have a short amount of time before a worm shows up. And trust me, they will show up. We've been lucky so far. Once we find the vehicle, we'll see if they can be recovered. And if they can, Method will lead the recovery teams.
And with that, we'll take a quick break.
Dun, dun, dun.
Just believe that there is a genuine creative magic in believing, and magic there will be.
All right. Ready to come back? Yeah, where are we?
I'm on.
I'm not here. What if there are survivors? Lexi asked. Loom shook his head.
There won't be. No one can survive almost 3 days out here without supplies.
But
There are no buts. I wouldn't leave any of my hunters behind. We're here to recover the vehicles if possible. If you wander off or get lost, I will leave you, understand? But you just said you wouldn't leave any of us. You also said that to the boss.
Rogbert said. Loom leaned over and rested his hand on the bulkhead behind Rogbert, looking him directly in the face.
I said I wouldn't leave any of my hunters behind. You aren't one of my hunters, now are you?
Rogbert fidgeted uncomfortably at that realization.
Well, maybe we can kill us a worm then.
Anon said, taking a swig from the bottle of shine. Loom looked at him curiously, wondering where he pulled that one from. He shook his head and walked towards the back of the six. Anon smiled and looked over at Rogbert.
Exactly how many bottles of shine do you have?
He asked, looking at the duffel bag under Anon's seat.
You will never know.
He said with a smile.
Give me that.
Rogbert said, grabbing the bottle from Anon and taking a big swig. It wasn't long before they neared the location and spotted the lost vehicles. They cautiously approached and parked nearby. A few moments later, the Six's door was open and the cool interior was replaced by hot desert air. Almost instantly, they were all covered in sweat.
Can I stay in the air conditioning?
Anon asked, wiping his brow. Loom looked over at him like he was about to punch him.
No, Anon.
Rogbert yelled, pushing him. Flag walked off the ramp into the sand, looking around at the sprawling desert around them. The area was mostly flat with only a few small, oddly placed hills.
Worm burrows.
Taylor said, walking past him, guessing what he was looking at.
I'm gonna near it. Okay. The two vehicles were both overturned some distance from each other. Method, stay on watch. Taylor, take Grom and Lexi, go check out the vehicle. Flag, Rogbert, and Anon with me. We're checking out the other one. Nellis, D, keep on those vibration sensors and keep comms open. I want to know the second you have a worm.
Will do, boss.
Flag replied. The group split up and headed towards their assigned vehicles. A moment later, Taylor came over the comm. Loom, we've got 2 dead. Loom grumbled. Is the vehicle salvageable? We should be able to get it running, she said. All right, Nellis, aid in the recovery. We're nearing the other vehicle. Roger. As they approached the overturned vehicle, Flag spotted a body laying face down in the sand and pointed it out. Loom walked over and rolled it over. It was Valorant, a very dead Valorant. He had a large wound on his chest and was missing an arm. God damn it, Loom said, looking over at the vehicle. Rodbert had gone over and looked inside. He shook his head as there was no one else in it. Well, that's... yeah, what a worm can do to you, Loom said, standing up looking around. Something a few meters away caught his attention, and he walked over. He knelt down and started to examine something in the sand. Flag came over to see what he had found.
What is it?
He asked. Footprints. 2 sets. Someone survived. Although they were hurt, he pointed at the footprints. From the pattern, it looked like one of them was dragging a leg, probably from an injury. Loom picked up his comm. Taylor, keep working on recovering the vehicles. We're following some tracks I found. Wait, someone's alive? I doubt it, but we're going to look. Okay, she replied. Loom looked over at the 3 of them. Let's go. They followed the tracks for a while, and eventually neared a worm burrow. Did they go down there? Anon asked, worried. Loom pulled out his rifle and stepped towards the opening. The opening looked to be about 3 meters in diameter and gently sloped down, disappearing underground. Looks like they did, Anon, he said, kneeling down next to the burrow's mouth and looking at the ground. He again pulled out his comm and called Taylor. Taylor, send Grom and Lexi over. I have a worm burrow I want to check out. Sure thing, she said. Wait, we're not going down there, are we? Anon stammered. What's wrong? Afraid of the dark? Loom asked, standing back up and dusting the sand off his pants. No, I was all Anon could say when Loom grabbed him and pushed him down the opening. Anon tumbled down the burrow and disappeared into the darkness. Anyone else?
Loom asked, looking at Flag and Rodbert. He cocked his rifle and turned on a high-looming tactical light.
Besides, it's a small tunnel, so it was made by a small worm.
Flag pulled out his pistol.
What do you think that's going to do?
Loom asked. Flag looked at it and shrugged.
You have no clue how to take out a worm, do you?
Flag shook his head. Loom looked over at Rodbert.
I mean, you're using a rifle.
Rodbert replied. Loom pressed something on his rifle, and there was a sudden click, followed by a flash of blue light and a loud creaking sound. The end of his rifle lit up as electricity coursed between 2 prods that were deployed.
Oh.
Rodbert replied. Flag got the idea. He needed something electric. He holstered his pistol and pulled out a pair of electric knuckles. Loom looked back at Rodbert, who didn't have anything like that.
Fusion blade?
Loom asked Rodbert, who shook his head. Loom sighed.
And you wanted to be worm hunters? Do you at least have light?
Flag and Rodbert pulled out their comm terms and turned them on. It wasn't all that bright, but it was enough to see. Loom sighed and looked down the tunnel just as Grom and Lexi came up.
Taylor, we're going in. I'll stay in touch.
Okay, we righted the first vehicle. We're towing it to the second, and we'll work on them there. Loom looked over at Flag and Rodbert. Not wanting to be pushed, they started down the burrow, followed by Grom and Lexi. As they went deeper down the tunnel, the air became cooler. There was also a slight breeze that came from further down. The air had a musty smell. They neared the bottom and saw Anon standing in the dark, staring down the dark worm burrow.
Anon!
Rodbert said, placing a hand on his shoulder, causing him to jump. Anon looked over, his face illuminated by the blue light from Rodbert's comm. Anon was wearing infrared goggles.
And I thought you were standing in the dark.
Flag said, laughing.
See anything?
Just an empty tunnel, guys.
Anon replied, looking back down the burrow.
At least one of you isn't completely useless.
Loom said, noticing Anon's sighting.
Anon, you can take point.
Anon hesitated momentarily, but eventually complied, fearing he would be pushed, kicked, or otherwise beaten in some way.
Hey, guys.
Anon said.
What, Anon? It smells down here.
Rodbert and Flag looked at each other exhaustedly and continued through the tunnel behind Anon. They proceeded for some time when they came to a crossing tunnel.
Which way?
Loom came over and looked at the ground.
I'm not sure the footsteps are gone. Looks like a worm came through. That can't be good.
Rodbert said. Loom shined his light down each of the tunnels.
Let's split up. Flag, Rodbert, Anon, continue down that way.
He said, pointing his light.
Grom and Lexi, you two are with me.
Be safe, guys, Grom said, following Loom away and disappearing down the burrow. Anon took his pack off and started rummaging through it. Flag and Rodbert looked at him curiously as he pulled out a can of fluorescent orange spray paint.
So we don't get lost, duh.
He said, spraying an arrow in the direction they came from.
Actually, a good idea.
Flag said. They continued down the burrow, and Anon sprayed an arrow every 20 meters or so. The orange paint actually reflected quite brightly from the blue light that comms were giving off. They passed another junction when Anon suddenly stopped.
Anon?
Rodbert asked.
There's something up ahead. Against the wall.
He said, pulling out his pistol.
I don't think that will do anything against the worm.
I don't think it's a worm.
Anon replied, moving forward. Flag and Rodbert followed cautiously behind, not being able to see what he saw.
Really needs some better night stuff.
Rodbert whispered. He was right, but Flag didn't say anything in reply. They slowly moved closer and could finally see what Anon was looking at. It looked like nothing more than a shadow at first, but as they grew nearer, it became clearer. The shadow was a person. No, two people, both sitting against the side of the tunnel. They rushed over and knelt down in front of them. They were two of the missing worm hunters, Tax and Courtney, both of them injured. Tax's lower leg was bandaged and he had a tourniquet on it. Both of them were covered in blood and worm guts. Next to Courtney, there was a stun rod and a light similar to the one Loom was using.
Are they...
Anon asked, but Flag couldn't tell. He couldn't see them breathing. Flag reached out and gently lifted Courtney's head. He jumped as her eyes opened and she tried to speak, but it was all indistinguishable. Flag took out a pouch of warm water and brought it to her mouth. She was weak, but she grabbed the pouch from him and sucked down the water as if it was life itself, because at that moment, it was.
Tax?
Flag asked, looking over.
I'm not sure yet.
Rodbert said, pulling out a small medical pack. Flag looked at him curiously.
I have some medical experience.
Flag didn't know that. He didn't think Rodbert was the medical type. Rodbert looked through the small pack.
Damn it, I need a stim. I thought it would have one.
He said, discouraged.
Here.
Anon said, holding two medical stims out to him.
She could probably use one also.
Rodbert looked at Anon, who gestured again.
Where do you get this stuff? You know what? Just never mind.
Rodbert took the stems and injected them into Tax and Courtney. A moment later, Tax's eyes opened and he woke up. The nanites in the stems quickly working to repair some of their injuries. Tax tried to get his bearings and looked up at Rodbert, very confused.
You're okay now.
He said as reassuringly as he could. Tax looked over and saw Courtney. She attempted a partial smile and held out the pouch of water. He sighed and grimaced as he tried to take the pouch with a shaky hand.
Careful, you're in rough shape.
Rodbert said, helping him bring the pouch to his mouth, which he eagerly drank from.
Let me work on this.
Rodbert said, turning to his leg. No, Tax yelled hoarsely, as if he just remembered where they were and what had happened. We don't have time. We have to get out of here while we can, he said.
It's fine. Don't worry.
Guys.
We're here with
We're here
Lou.
with Moon.
Guys.
We have transport.
Guys!
What?
Flag and Rodbert both yelled. If Anon answered, they couldn't hear him, as there was suddenly an ear-shattering moan that bellowed through the tunnel. A large gust of wind hit them and knocked them all over. Flag looked over at Rodbert wide-eyed and turned, looking down the tunnel. He couldn't see anything. There wasn't enough light. He picked up the light that was lying next to Courtney. Luckily, it still had a charge. He turned it on and shined it down the tunnel. All he saw was darkness. It was as if the light was being absorbed by something. The tunnel seemed like it was disappearing in front of them, the darkness rapidly moving towards them. It wasn't a shadow. It was a worm, and it was coming at them fast.
Run!
Anon shouted, darting past. Rodbert panicked and turned to run after Anon. Flag grabbed the handful on Rodbert's backpack, stopping him.
Hold on. We need to help them.
Flag yelled, looking at Courtney and Tax.
We're all dead.
Rodbert said, helping Courtney to her feet. Flag looked for the stun rod, but it wasn't there.
I'm okay. Help
She
Tax.
said, losing her balance and almost falling over.
Like hell you are. Flag, you got him?
Rodbert asked. Flag's answer was cut short by another loud moan. Flag helped Tax to his feet.
Sorry, Tax. I'm gonna have to try and carry you. It's the only way we might get you out of here. You're like as fuck.
Flag said, throwing him over his shoulder. Tax was by no means light, but he had no choice, especially with Anon running off. He mustered his strength and headed away from the worm as fast as he could. It didn't look good, and he knew it. The worm was moving through the tunnel very quickly, when he suddenly saw another shadow in front of him. Luckily, it was only Anon, running back towards them. Flag panicked, thinking he was trapped. that another worm was headed towards him from the opposite direction when he saw something in Anon's hand. He was holding a grenade. Flag's eyes widened.
I got this, guys.
Anon yelled, running past. Flag turned just as Anon threw it.
No, we're in it!
Flag's heart dropped.
Anon's throw was anything but glorious.
Oh, you wanted me to do that?
No, that's fine.
I did a better
That's
cliffhanger.
good. You
I thought.
did. I thought that's a good spot. I like that.
Thanks.
You're better. I'm not gonna lie. We'll stop right there. That's a nice cliffhanger, right?
Yeah.
Boy,
Well,
that was something.
what are the boys gonna do next? So that's the first chapter of 2096.
First 4 episodes, chapters.
yeah.
About an hour read.
Yeah. It was a lot of fun playing through this game. Just to give you a little background, it's kind of like tabletop dice.
Yeah, it's a tabletop role-playing game.
I know you hate saying Dungeons and Dragons, but for a lot of people,
That's it. It is Dungeons.
they understand that style.
D&D, Cyberpunk, all those games.
Choose your own adventure. Don't roll a 1, because when you roll a 1, you're
And you can compare it to all these other games, which is great, but I made this, 25 years ago. It's been sitting in a blue binder, so
Time for
actually
the world to see it.
tried to do a Kickstarter last year, which didn't work out. I was over ambitious, I guess you could say, but we're going to go with that. We're going to keep putting books out. Hopefully anyone that watched this pops in, listens to this, enjoyed it on our holiday weekend.
Yeah.
Nice Friday night with the country just
Icy.
freezing.
Yeah, we're here in
Ice.
New England. It's pretty cold and icy. Good night for a read through. We'll do more of this. We'll continue the story.
A little chaotic, but
Yeah.
it always is. The
First
games,
one. We're
games are
getting
a little chaotic.
a new series here on the Phoenix Files. Maybe someday we'll actually play a game on here. We can get some people together. That'd be nice. But either way, we're gonna do some more read-throughs. I have some books other than this one that I'd like to read too. New format, something else to throw out there. Change it up a little bit. We'll be DJing on Wednesdays, and any other night I can just pop in. Thank you, my lovely wife, for narrating most of this.
The one non-Christmas thing I plan on doing this weekend. It's
Yeah,
pretty
everything else
nice.
is Christmas.
Yeah.
She is actually an elf. I'm pretty sure she's on Santa's payroll.
All I'm saying is Mariah Carey is called the Christmas Queen because of one song. I do way more Christmas stuff than she does. So
Sure. That's
All right, that's going to do it here. Thanks for everybody who tuned in. It's going to be posted and running. So if you missed any of it, go back, check out the recording. And thanks. 2096, Phoenix Files. You all have a Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays.